Hello, everybody. The UK needs to leave the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and it also needs to repeal Tony Blair's Human Rights Act, which requires all legislation and all court rulings in the UK to be adherent to the ECHR, and all of the judgments that come from increasingly activist woke judges in Strasbourg that inhabit the European Court of Human Rights that has been set up. Now, there are most people that follow me, that follow these channels, that are members of the Heritage Party, support generally what's happening on the right wing of politics and the freedom movement, would completely agree with that position, because we have a crisis in mass rapid migration. And of course, there are tens of thousands of people coming to the UK every year on small boats. And that is being facilitated by both the fake Conservative Party and the Labour Party. And they're hiding behind the ECHR in saying, well, we can't do anything about it because of the ECHR. Well, they could leave. You need to give 1 year's notice and then you leave, and then you can return migrants to their home countries. And these ridiculous excuses that are being used all the time. Oh, we can't send this person back because he won't be able to get this medicine which he can get on the NHS, or we can't send this person back because, oh, his neighbors might say something nasty about him because he's gay or whatever. All of these ridiculous excuses for people to stay in the country and keep receiving money, welfare, healthcare payments, and the right to travel to the country for their relatives and family as well will just be gone. And this is clearly an abuse of something that was good back in its time in 1950, but is no longer fit for purpose. Another thing that probably people don't know so much is that much of the insanity about transgenderism that we've had in the UK and has been, repeated in countries around the world comes from a judgment in the European Court of Human Rights, which required member countries to recognize gender reassignment. So we have this Gender Recognition Act 2004, which we had to put in place because we're members of the ECHR, and that we were required by a judgment to recognize transgenderism in British law. People don't know that so much, but that's another negative, very, very negative social effect, an insane ruling of the ECHR there. Now, the thing is, there's a small minority of people who are saying, oh, you're against our human rights. Well, I'm not against our human rights. The idea that the human rights that we have in England and Wales and Ireland, both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which are common law jurisdictions, the idea that those come from Tony Blair, it's ridiculous. Tony Blair did everything he possibly could to undermine the fabric of our society. So the Human Rights Act from Tony Blair in 1998 does not give us our human rights. I mean, the idea that we didn't have any human rights before Tony Blair's Human Rights Act of 1998 is just patently ridiculous. Now, you may make perhaps a better argument that our human rights come from the ECHR from 1950. It was drafted by British lawyers in 1948, 1949, and came into force in 1950. But again, it doesn't hold up. And it's longer ago in history. It's 75 years ago. But our human rights in our common law jurisdictions do not come from the European Convention of Human Rights, because we have those anyway. In common law, you have fundamental freedoms. It's assumed you can do anything you want unless it's specifically prohibited, either by a jury, a jury of your peers who might try you for a crime, and then they will come to the judgment, it should do, the judgment that something is unlawful if it causes harm, loss, damage, or injury to another living man or living woman. So that's our common law. We don't need to be told what our human rights are by a court in Strasbourg, because we have human rights, it is assumed. Now, the thing is, the majority of jurisdictions in Europe are Roman law jurisdictions. And in Roman law, in those countries, they need to be told what their rights are, because under Roman law, it's the opposite of common law. Under Roman law, you don't have any rights unless it's specifically said or prescribed in law that you have the right to do something. So you are not permitted to do anything unless you're specifically allowed by a law that says you can do this, you can do this. You have freedom of speech. So we will let you say this and you let you say that, and no more. So that's the way human rights works in Roman law jurisdictions. But we don't need that in our common law jurisdictions. Sadly, Scotland is Roman law jurisdiction. But, the solution for Scotland is to become a common law jurisdiction. And then the whole of the UK will be under common law. Then there won't be any problem in that area, at least. The thing is also, the ECHR, even though it was set up after the devastation of the Second World War, obviously, because the UK was not we were affected, of course, by the Second World War, fought in it, but we were never occupied either by National Socialism or communism, whereas like most of the other countries in Europe were either occupied by one or the other, or tragically both, over the 50-year period from 1939 to 1989. But the initial signatories to the ECHR included all the countries which were languishing under communism at that time: Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, the Soviet Union. I mean, do you think that the ECHR gave citizens in those countries human rights? I mean, that's just laughable. The idea that you had freedom of speech in the Soviet Union. Well, no, you didn't. You said anything that the government didn't like, you'd be off to the gulag. So it wasn't worth the paper it was written on then for most countries. And it's not worth the paper it's written on now. It's just basically become a document that allows activist judges, woke judges who have been marinated in cultural Marxism, in Marxist indoctrination centers previously known as universities, in order to make judgments which undermine traditional values and the values, the principles, Christian principles, traditional principles that we've operated by in our lands for many centuries, is actually something that is undermining our lands and our society rather than enhancing our human rights. When lockdown happened, where was the ECHR to stop lockdowns? When Keir Starmer interfered with due process and said people who made posts on social media should be held on remand and coerced into pleading guilty so they can be put in prison, like Lucy Connolly was put in prison, given a 31-month sentence because she was not given bail, as would be normal for a minor offense. Where was the ECHR then? It was nowhere to be seen. It's not worth the paper it's written on. So it's just very bizarre that people who fought against lockdowns, who fought for free speech, just a small minority of people are actually now agitating for the UK to stay in the ECHR and to keep one of Tony Blair's dreadful acts of parliament, as though that's the thing that's going to continue our freedom. It's not. The thing that will continue our freedom is for us in the UK to vote Labour out, as we voted the fake Conservatives out. It's good the fake Conservatives are dead and buried. Nearly they're gone. Labour will be dead and buried and gone in the next general election. People are concerned about reform, which is being promoted as being the next party of government. I don't think that they're going to be particularly good, and they will probably do some things which are harmful to our freedoms, even though they're pretending that they're all for freedom. We have to remember that at the time of coerced injections, they were 100% behind no jab, no job. So they're not going to be for our freedom. But the thing to do is vote for me, vote for the Heritage Party. So don't sit there and say, oh, you know, we need the ECHR for our rights, which is never done anything for our rights in this country, and it never will do. And then also say, oh, but there's no point in voting. There is a point in voting. There is a point in getting involved in politics. And the party to support is the Heritage Party. And I'm just going to go through a couple of things in our manifesto to explain this a little bit more. And another thing that goes together with the reason why we should not be in the ECHR, and this is from one of the sections in the Heritage Party, which is on national sovereignty. It begins with this statement: the United Kingdom should be governed only by her own citizens, and all legislation passed by Parliament should be formulated with primary respect to the national interest and the liberty and prosperity of the British people. And early on in that section, we have a reference to the English Bill of Rights, 1689, which very famously says, no foreign prince, person, prelate, state, or potentate should have any jurisdiction, power, or authority within the realm. Any contravention of this principle is repugnant to our Constitution, and we will declare any such legislation, regulations, treaties, or agreements to be null and void. So, just as the European Communities Act 1972 was repugnant to our Constitution, we should never have joined the EU and given power away to the EU Commission and the EU Council. We should not have joined the ECHR and given power away to foreign judges in order to make rulings and judgments over and above the courts and parliaments of our nation. That is the principle of national sovereignty, which I think everybody who is right-minded will agree with. And even though the convention itself has some good things in it, which all came from English law, British law, of course, you know, not so much Scottish law because that's Roman law, but English law. Even though it had some good things, that was to help other countries in Europe. We didn't need them ourselves in 1950 because they are all part of our common law understanding, our constitution in this country. So the actual convention has a number of articles. I'm not going to put them all up here. This is again summarized in the Heritage Party manifesto. These are articles 2 to 12 listed here of the ECHR and the rights that you have. The thing is, they're not so much rights as prohibitions on the state. So you have the right to life. That means the state may not kill you. The state may not kill you in the UK. We don't have capital punishment anymore. There's a prohibition of torture and inhuman or degrading punishment. So that's not allowed in the UK. It was allowed in the Soviet Union, in communist Eastern European countries, even under the ECHR. It didn't stop those countries from torturing people, sending them to the gulags, inhuman and degrading punishments. That the ECHR didn't stop that from happening for all its member states for a very long time. But we don't have that in the UK because torture is prohibited in the UK under our own law. We don't need the ECHR to tell us that torture is prohibited. In no inhuman or degrading punishment, you're not allowed. Cruel and unusual punishments were prohibited at Magna Carta. and in the Bill of Rights of 1689. Prohibition of slavery and forced labor. Of course, the UK was the first country in the world to prohibit slavery. We don't need the ECHR to tell us that. We told Europe that that's what they need to do. There should be no unlawful detention or imprisonment. We have habeas corpus. You have a right to a fair trial. There should be no punishment without the law. So you shouldn't be picked up, arrested, and given a punishment or a sentence without law. Now, these things are being eroded at the edges in our country at the moment, as they are all around Europe, Western Europe particularly. It's quite sadly ironic that that Western Europe helped to defeat communism in Eastern Europe, and now there's more freedom in Eastern Europe than there is in Western Europe, because we seem to be building a communist system here in the West with the parties that we have in government. But the ECHR is not stopping this from happening. The only thing that will stop this from happening is to vote in a party that will fully respect our fundamental freedoms and human rights, which is the Heritage Party. Going on to Article 8, the right to respect for private and family life. Article 9, freedom of thought, conscience and religion. Article 10, freedom of expression. Article 11, freedom of assembly and association. And Article 12, the right to marry. Now, all of those things, all parties say that they support those things. Clearly, the fake Conservatives and Labour don't. They're undermining them. But we have the understanding that you have those fundamental freedoms of thought, conscience, religion, expression, I suppose anonymity in the respect to right for privacy, and freedom of assembly and association. They're being undermined. But again, the ECHR is nowhere to be seen to stop this legislation, repeated acts of legislation coming in the UK that undermine them, facial recognition, the Online Safety Act, which is not about safety, the Communications Act back from 2003, many different iterations of the Public Order Act, the police and crime bills, or policing and crime, or crime and policing bills. Every government introduces one, and every time they erode a little bit more of our freedoms. But the ECHR is nowhere to be seen to restore our freedoms again. So the problem with that is, again, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And the only way to ensure we have our fundamental freedoms restored, once again, join and stand and vote for the Heritage Party, which I've set up, and those things I've showed you on the screen there are from our manifesto. Finally, I'm going to read this out. This is again from the Heritage Party manifesto, why we need to leave the ECHR. Most urgently, we must leave the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, and its courts to regain full control of our national sovereignty. We can trust that our own system of common law will better protect the human rights of our citizens without the interference of foreign activist judges. Again, most of whom, or many of whom, will not let us deport criminal migrants from our own shores and have our own sovereignty. The original ECHR is a good convention, which was drafted in 1950 by British lawyers to help restore human rights in a continent devastated by the Second World War. I should add to that communism as well. 75 years on, however, activist judges in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg have made all manner of rulings which prevent the UK government from imposing law and order here at home and carrying out the wishes of the British electorate. They have blocked the deportation of terrorists and foreign criminals on several occasions, leaving them free to roam the streets of Britain, as well as ruling that we must recognize gender transitioning, leading to the Gender Recognition Act 2004, and give prisoners the vote. Our nation must not remain subject to such rulings. And that is from the Heritage Party manifesto, the only party that speaks common sense, explains why we need to do something, and will carry out what we need to do to restore our freedom and our sovereignty and keep our streets safe in the United Kingdom. So please come and join us. Thank you for listening, and God bless you all.